Hello, and welcome to this talk about the placement of settlements along Roman roads in southern England. This talk is a reply to one by Martin Deon entitled Mantio Mutatio Spacing Issues in the London Region. Martin started by introducing the cursus publicus, the system by which the Romans transported both fast messengers and slow goods transport along the Roman roads by giving access to overnight accommodation at mansiones and also horse changing stations for the faster riders called mutationes. This system implies a regularity of settlement spacing along Roman roads based on a day's travel. But the reality is settlements are spaced very unevenly along Roman roads, something which Martin discussed. His explanation was that this was to accommodate different speed traffic. For instance, at the higher end you have the horse messenger who needs to get a message to the local government quickly. This would be very fast travel, and at the other end you have ox-drawn carts taking bulk goods along the Roman roads to market. The cursus publicus is also discussed by the late Ernest Black in his book from the BAR Bridges series. Ernest does not go into the position of settlements along Roman roads, but he does discuss first and second class accommodation found at these sites and how local housing is used in its place where that is not available. He also discusses the Bordeaux itinerary, which, unlike the Antonine itinerary, glosses how the settlements along the road are used. This is usually alternating mansiones and mutationes, though that is not always the case. What I would like to suggest is the main reason for why Roman settlements are placed where they are along Roman roads is something that was mentioned briefly in Martin's talk, but I would like to spend a lot more time discussing, and that is water. I'd noticed that there were many settlements placed next to water of one form or another. The most obvious reason for doing this is where you have a settlement, you have a need for water, whether for drinking or for animals or for bathing or for industry or other uses. To illustrate this, here is some geophysics I was involved with at the Roman roadside settlement at Barkham, at the junction of Farn Street and the Barkham to London Roman Road. There are several things to note here. You can see the bulk of the settlement is on the right of the River Ouse, though there is also some additional settlement on the left side. This is quite a common feature of roadside settlements along rivers, where you do get settlements on both sides. Also notice the double-ditched enclosure in the centre of the settlement. This is common in civilian settlements, and these usually appear in the late 2nd century. They seem to be of a military type plan, so this does suggest some form of official use of the settlement which the military deemed worth protecting. For those of you wondering what is Farn Street, this is Farn Street. It is the road from Harbden to Pevensey. Previously, when looking at the road, the settlements at Arlington and Hardham were already known about, and while looking for the previously unknown section of road between Hardham and Barkham, I came across the settlement at Barkham. It was at this point that I realised the connection between Roman roads and settlements at river crossings. I tested this by looking at the River Adur, and there I found the settlement at Streatham Manor, confirming the theory, at least on this road. Incidentally, if you want to know more about Farn Street, I have written a book on the subject encompassing 13 years of research along that road. It can be purchased from Archaeology Plus, and there is a link in the text below this video. In the Roman period, the river system was used much more for transport than it is today. The reason for this is because in the Roman period it was a lot more efficient to transport bulk goods by river than by road. When we think of a Roman road crossing a river, we should be thinking in terms of a crossroads. We should be discussing the length of the river that can be used as a road in the context of its tidal reach. This is the site of the Roman fort and settlement at Brough-on-Humber. Next to that is an area of artificially raised land, which I believe is a Roman quay. The reason I think that is because foundations for Roman buildings have been found at the edge of this feature that would otherwise be in the middle of the air if that feature were not there. Industry, such as this ironworking site, were often sited by rivers. You could get raw materials in, you could get bulk goods out, and some of the processes may have involved water. The river system we see today is often not much like the river system back in Roman times. Since then, there has been a lot of land reclamation, and there has been a lot of agricultural runoff of material now that trees are being cleared, so a lot of these channels have silted up. Here you can see the original Roman quayside is now 50 metres from what is left of the stream. Something else you will sometimes see is small inlets at the side of rivers that could be used as safe ports. Here the flow would be less strong, and in this case the geophysics has several trackways leading to this inlet at the side of the river. Moving on from river transport, another thing that rivers give you with the aid of a bridge to cross it is security. You can control who is crossing the river to move on to the road over the other side, perhaps for security, perhaps for tax reasons. This security aspect may be taken further. The settlement itself may be placed in a naturally defensive position, such as within the bend of a river. The most extreme example of this you can see on the bottom right at Great Casterton. This means the settlements were defended on 2 or 3 sides. While most of the settlements in southern England are in civilian areas, if the roads themselves, and therefore the settlements, were laid out by the military, there is no reason they wouldn't have applied the same defensive mindset to the location of those settlements. There were more types of defensive setup than the U-shaped bend in the river. Here is Roman Londinium. London is protected on its south side by the River Thames, but also on the west side by the River Fleet in a T-shaped defensive setup. Here is a variation of the T-shaped setup. This is Maidstone in Kent. Instead of crossing the main river, the Roman road here is crossing the minor side river. Back to Farn Street in Sussex. This is the Streatham Manor settlement on the River Adur, and it's bounded on 2 sides by streams. This is a double T defensive setup, only attackable on one side. Also well defended due to the angle of the 2 rivers, this is Fleet Marston in a Y-shaped defensive setup. Moving on from defence, there are other reasons why settlements were sited next to water in the Roman period. There seems to have been a connection, at least in the southeast, between springs and temples. This can be seen at Titsey in Surrey, and on this slide you can see Springhead in Kent, where an entire temple complex was arranged around the top of a spring. Here is the south of England. It's very much a work in progress. I've tried to classify the settlements that I've found so far by their relationship with water. Those marked in red have a river crossing with a defensive element. Those in orange are a purely straight river crossing. Yellow is springs, blue is sea access, and black is where there is no obvious connection with water. I wanted to discuss some of the exceptions to my theory that there is a connection between roadside settlements and water, and here is the first. This is Silchester, which is cited where it is because of a major Iron Age settlement at that location. There are other settlements where both Iron Age occupation and water seems to be a factor, such as Chichester and Canterbury. Next up is Hassocks in Sussex. This site is problematic not only because we don't know where the centre of the settlement is, but we also don't know the main course of the road to London. There are several candidates, and Margaret is likely not one of them. This settlement is traditionally understood as being on a crossroads in the Roman period, with the north-south road leading from Portslade in the south to London to the north. But there is little evidence of the road to the south, and with the settlement to the east at Barkham now showing with geophysics that the road started on Farm Street instead of Lewis, being the Barkham to London road, it is also quite possible that this is the Hassocks to London road. So is the settlement there because of the road to London, or is the road to London there because of the settlement? One explanation for the siting of this settlement may be gained by looking at Farn Street as a whole. If you look at the position of the rivers along this road, the block of land in which Hassocks sits between the rivers Ada and Ouse is the largest block of land without a river. It may have been too long for there to have been no settlement in between. Hassocks is next to a fairly small stream, roughly in the centre of that block. A similar example to Hassocks can be seen at Wall, only much more clearly. Here you have the crossroads with the settlement built to one side close to a small stream. Again, is the settlement there because of the crossroads, only off to one side to be closer to the water, or is the crossroads there because of the settlement, only built to one side because the settlement was already established and putting a road through it would have been problematic? Another similar example can be seen just along the road to the east from Wall at Mansetta, not sure how you pronounce that. Again, you have the crossroads offset to one side of the settlement, with the settlement being close to, this time, a much more substantial body of water. Looking at these three examples, my feeling is that the water, no matter how insignificant, is more important than the road junction for the siting of these settlements, but that is far from certain. Now on to Martin's home territory, where the road leading north out of London roughly follows the course of the River Lee, though not close enough so that the river would have been of any use to the settlements along that road. While there is a tiny stream at the Enfield site, there are much more substantial watercourses to the south of that settlement, so water is obviously not the primary motivation for locating the settlement here. One thing to note is that the distance from Ware to Cheshunt Park Farm is roughly the same as from Cheshunt Park Farm to Enfield. Could we be seeing an example of the mythical equally spaced settlements that we are supposed to expect from the Cursus Publicus? If so, this is the only example I am aware of in England. Now on to Croydon in Surrey. While the site is next to an obviously very substantial paleochannel, there is no river there now, so it's not clear whether there was a substantial watercourse there in the Roman period. From sites which don't fully fit the theory to a lack of sites where the theory says there should be some. The road between Cirencester and Alcester is a good example of this, with many more watercourses than there are known settlements along the road. Of course, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and this would be a good road to study to see if this theory holds true. I should point out that the way I found the settlements outside of the southeast, where I'm familiar with the archaeological record, is to use Heritage Gateway to look at the river crossings and see if there is any settlements marked. This will obviously produce a biased data set. Looking at Watling Street to the southeast of London, you can see there are a number of settlements which do fit the theory, but there are far too many of them, many more than would be needed for the Cursus Publicus. Not all settlements may be official in nature. It may be that the site of a river next to a road is a particularly nice place to live, and the settlement may grow up organically around that place. So it seems that water is the most important factor for the placement of a settlement in most cases, but not all. I am most familiar with the archaeology of the southeast, where the theory seems to work. I'm less familiar with the rest of the country. Does the theory work in your part of the country? Whether you agree with the theory or not, please let me know in the comments below.